Welcome back to Startup Hack. I'm Spencer Thomason, and here at Startup Hack, we love to train software developers and build custom software solutions. So I do a lot of work as a fractional CTO. With over a decade of executive leadership experience and a solid 25 years in software development, I've mastered the art of transforming technology teams and products. So today we're diving into a topic that I'm passionate about, but it might ruffle some feathers. And this is why I hate Scrum and why it is frankly ridiculous. So let's dive in. All right, so we're gonna dive into this topic today, and I know this is one that really kind of like, I get a lot of eyebrows raised when I tell people I hate Scrum. I love Agile, I love Kanban, but I just can't stand Scrum. And so we're gonna talk a little bit about it today and why this isn't a super popular opinion, but I just really don't like Scrum, but I'm gonna use some very real world examples. And here's one that we can use that comes with satire that we saw from the recent CloudStrike failure. So let me switch screens here really quick and jump over here. I'm going to refresh this page here to get this to start over. There might be another way to start it over, but we're just going to do it this way. So I was watching this and I found this on, and I thought this was hilarious.
Intern pushed a software update that is causing a global IT meltdown.
On behalf of our whole team, I'd like to formally apologize for all the outages that we have caused globally across the world. We've heard reports that the issue has impacted things like telecommunications, hospitals, traffic lights, flights globally. And after further internal investigation, it was found that the issue was actually caused by an intern who pushed some bad code to prod with a missing semicolon due to the fact that he was playing Elden Ring. And one of our product managers was the one that approved the code straight to prod and pushed it live. So apparently, quote, we have to get this thing in so that our burn down chart looks good for the end of the sprint. We're still investigating what that means. But rest assured, we are taking immense action to make sure something like this can never happen again. One of which is that we have just scheduled an 8-hour sprint retro that will be actually on Saturday. So we're all looking forward to that. But once again, we want to thank you all. We know a lot of you probably have never heard of our company before and have no idea what we do. And it's kind of crazy that we've grown so big that we're a single point of failure now for the rest of the world. So that's awesome for us. But yeah, deeply, terribly sorry.
What do you mean an intern pushed a software update that is causing a global IT meltdown?
Okay, so I think there's a lot of funny points here, but he talks about, the 8-hour retro on Saturday. So I'm going to need you to come in on Saturday. Right, yeah. So it's a joke, but really this is like, there's so many things about Scrum that are just comical when you really step back and look at it. And when you look at something like this, hitting that burn down chart, right? Like that was going to be so important that they potentially pushed this. And I have no idea how much of this is satire, how much of it came from real, but I thought it was really funny and it kind of pointed out a lot of my examples here. So we're going to dive into this a little bit, but let's start off with the daily stand-up meeting, a cornerstone of Scrum. Now, I'm actually a fan of daily stand-ups, but these meetings are supposed to be quick check-ins, but they often turn into extended stand-up comedy sessions without the laughs. So everyone shares what they did yesterday and what they're going to do today, and if they have any blockers. Now, it sounds good in theory, and if you have somebody who's really strict at keeping them brief, I think these are actually a very important cornerstone of a team. But sometimes reality goes way out into left field. It can often get very repetitive and can feel like a waste of time. You may hear many times, you can hear people say, still working on the same ticket. And it's like, for me as a manager, if I've heard that a day or two in a row, I know I need to get my butt in gear and go help that person get unstuck. But as developers, our time is precious, and endless stand-up meetings aren't always the best use of it. So biggest thing about stand-up, I'm actually a big fan of them. Keep them brief, keep them short. Don't make sure there's somebody who can police it and say, we're going to take this offline. All right, sprint planning madness. Now, next we have sprint planning, right? This is where the team gets together to plan out the work for the next sprint, typically 2 weeks, right? So the problem is sprint planning can feel like a never-ending debate club. Prioritizing tasks, estimating efforts, agreeing on what realistically can be accomplished often leads to hours of discussion and very little actual planning. It's like trying to herd cats, and we all know how that ends. So effective planning is crucial, but sprint planning often misses the mark here. This is part of the reason I don't even love sprints. I love Kanban, and you can still do delivery cycles, still do delivery timelines, do estimates, all those kind of things. But I just am not a huge fan of sprints because if you're always sprinting, when do you get a rest? Yeah, okay. So then it would be a marathoning, not a sprint. Anyways, so the myth of the burn down chart. The burn down chart, Scrum's favorite visual aid. The idea is to track progress and ensure that the team is on pace to complete the sprint. Let me see if I can find a good picture of a good burn down chart here. But the point of a burn down chart is supposed to help you to be able to measure how your team is doing in supposedly burning down like story points, right? And that's usually what it's meant for. It's meant for and it's meant to see it and to be able to track the progress and ensure the team is still on pace. However, in reality, the burn down chart often looks like a random line graph with no real actual progress. Tasks, but tasks get completed with different rates, for unforeseen issues arise, and the chart becomes more of a stress indicator than a useful tool. So watching the burn down chart is like watching a horror movie. You know something is bad is going to happen but you're not sure when. Now, my least favorite part about all of Scrum is the sprint retro, a lesson in futility. The sprint retro is meant to be a time for reflection and improvement. The team discusses what went well, what didn't go well, and how to improve. However, it often devolves into gripe sessions with little actionable outcomes. So my biggest point to that is it seems like the same person every time comes up with something new to gripe, and it just becomes their place where they feel like they can gripe about whatever they want. Repeatedly discussing the same issues without resolution can be incredibly frustrating. One of the things that I don't love about sprint retros that seem to really highlight it is you'll talk about what's wrong with that retro, but yet everything that's already been going to go into the next sprint has already been planned. So you could really talk about the same thing in the next retro because you haven't fixed it from the previous retro. I know that sounds a little confusing, but the reality of the matter is it's like being stuck in an endless loop discussing the same problems with no end in sight. Improvement is key in development, and I get this. I'm a big fan of Agile and trying to improve, but retrospectives almost always fall short of delivering real change. I tell people all the time that I liken them to a sixth grade, like elementary school election, right? You have these kids who are like, I'm going to run for class president, and we're going to have ice cream for lunch every day and unlimited recesses, right? And they have no ability to actually promise or actually deliver any of those promises. And I kind of feel like that's what happened in retro is you can either A, ignore the problem and just know that it's going to come back and you're going to gripe about it next retro, or B, you can pretend you're going to fix it and that everything's going to become all kumbaya and everybody's going to be happy. But the reality of the matter is you're likely going to be stuck with the same thing in 2 weeks. And so really, retros are really tricky because they aren't going to, really just becomes a big gripe session. Next one we're going to talk about is user stories, fiction or nonfiction. User stories are another of Scrum staple. They're supposed to describe features from an end user perspective. The reality is they're often read like bad fiction. Writing clear, concise, and actionable user stories is an art, and not everyone is an artist. Particularly very few product managers are artists. Now, I've had some great product managers out there. Shout out to Steve, Josh, lots of other great product managers. If you're listening, that would be fantastic. That would just warm my heart. But I've also had a lot of really bad ones. Misunderstandings and misinterpretations can lead to wasted effort and rework. It's like playing a game of telephone where the original message gets distorted by the time it reaches the developer. And so a story sometimes is only as good as its requirements. But I also think that you have to be careful to go the opposite way with user stories where everything is so overly scripted that there's no place for a developer to be innovative. So next, the Scrum Master, the zealot in the room. And I'm just as an FYI, I'm a twice trained Scrum Master. I've worked as Scrum Master on multiple teams, so pointing fingers at me here. But it's part of the reason I hate Scrum. So I'm blaming Scrum, not necessarily Scrum Master. So if you feel like I'm attacking you, I'm not attacking you, I'm attacking Scrum. But I still have to pick on Scrum Masters. And again, I've been one. So every Scrum team has a Scrum Master whose job is to ensure that the team follows the Scrum practices. But sometimes a Scrum Master turns into a Scrum zealot, enforcing rules with the fervor of a drill sergeant. Flexibility goes out the window. Team ends up spending more time adhering to Scrum rituals than actually developing software. Gasp, right? It's like having a gym coach who cares more about you counting your reps perfectly than about getting a good workout. Balance is essential, but zealotry disrupts. So, my point here is don't be a zealot. I've often heard it said, oh, if Scrum isn't working, then that means that if Scrum isn't working, that means you aren't doing it right. That would be a great example of a zealot. All right, next, the sprint review, a dog and pony show. Sprint review is where the team showcases the work completed during the sprint. I'm actually a big fan of demos, i.e. sprint reviews, but it's supposed to be a time for feedback and celebration. However, it often feels like a dog and pony show with the team scrambling to make everything look perfect. The pressure to deliver polished demos can lead to cutting corners or presenting unfinished work. It's like putting lipstick on a pig and hoping no one notices. Genuine feedback is critical, but the format often stifles it. Now, I think some of the parts here is that it depends on who the audience is. And sometimes if the audience can be too wide, it can turn into the dog and pony show. Deliver to real stakeholders. And this kind of gets us into the message of definition of done, which I won't really hit on today, but kind of really kills the whole premise of Scrum. Now, velocity, the false idol. Scrum teams often measure their productivity using velocity, the amount of work completed in a sprint. So the problem with velocity is it can become a false idol, worshipped at the expense of quality. Teams might inflate their estimates or rush through tasks to boost their numbers. It's like measuring your fitness by the number of gym visits rather than actual health improvements. So focusing on velocity can lead to a decline in the quality of work and the team morale. So you actually usually, in the sprint planning, size a user story. Then based on that size, you will measure how much you got done by the measurements of velocity. Well, but that's the point, is then you can start just inflating stories, and supposedly it all works out, but like it never really does. And it just becomes this game of velocity to just be this thing to be able to show the higher ups. And again, as a dev manager and as a Scrum Master, I've been guilty of playing some of those games. So this leads us to the point I mentioned earlier, the never-ending sprint. Scrum sprint cycles can feel like a never-ending treadmill. And sometimes it seems like that treadmill set on like 10. If you ever run on a treadmill on 10, you know what I mean. So just as you catch your breath from one sprint, the next one begins. The relentless pace leads to burnout and diminished creativity. Developers need time to think, to experiment, and to innovate. But the constant pressure of sprint leaves little room for that. It's like running a marathon with no finish line in sight. Balance and pacing are crucial for sustainable productivity. And this is probably one of my biggest gripes to Scrum. If you're always sprinting, when do you rest? That is where you lead to burnout, and there's no creativity. Plus, what ends up happening is you end up overvaluing your stories on the points so that you can make sure you get enough, because you don't want it to come up in your review that you're never completing all your stories in the sprint. Right? And so it becomes this game of gaming Scrum. And the sprint just, like, I just really despise the concept of these sprints. I like working with a delivery date that you're going to, like, every 2 weeks, we're going to ship stuff. Stuff that's done, we ship. Stuff that's not, it goes to the next cycle, right? And then this is part of how Kanban works. Kanban was developed by Toyota as part of assembly line. And so I like that because it allows people to be creative. And if you're doing the stand-ups right and you're doing check-ins with your manager, you can say, hey, look, this one's taking a little bit longer, and they can make a decision on whether you're going to table that and move it back into back into the backlog, or if you're going to keep working on it, right? So finally, Scrum often places an overemphasis on process rather than outcomes. The rituals, meetings, and artifacts can overshadow the actual goal of, heaven forbid, delivering valuable software. So it's easy to get lost in the mechanisms of Scrum and lose the sight of the bigger picture. It's like focusing more on the ingredients than the dish you're trying to cook. The process should serve the outcome, not the other way around. Now, I know I've said a lot of controversial things. I know there's a lot of Scrum Masters out there who are mad, a lot of Scrum coaches who want to come and find me and hunt down and like detain my children or something. Try not to make that too graphic. But what are your thoughts? Do you agree? Do you disagree? I love having a good, healthy discussion. So make sure that you like and subscribe to the channel. Here at Startup Hack, we love to train software developers in our coding boot camps and to build custom software solutions for companies. So reach out. We'd love to help, and make sure you leave a comment. If nothing else, just say hi or tell me I'm crazy because Scrum is perfect and I just must not be doing Scrum right. And we will catch you guys next time. Make sure you like and subscribe to the channel because we bring you lots of great tutorials and tips that every developer should know. See you next time.